everyone. Thank you, students. This is a lecture two of the Prestige program that was launched today morning by our dean, Professor R. Sudarshan. We have now a distinguished vice dean, Professor Sandeep Dikshit, who will be, talking about the practical aspects of learning social sciences and what are the kind of careers that you can expect in coming years after graduating for BA honors in social science and policy. I would like to introduce Professor Dikshit. Professor Dikshit has been involved in public policy and grassroots governance for more than 25 years, with many years of field-based work along with voluntary agencies and organizations in the non-government space as a member of parliament, human development researcher, and as a teacher. He has spent nearly 15 years in the field with voluntary organizations and action research studies in northern, central, and western India, primarily in Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Chhattisgarh. These years have given him intensive field experience and knowledge of challenges facing India, especially agriculture, rural non-farm sector, and urban development. Professor Dikshit has worked for over 25 years, for over 20 years in public policy, directly with state governments in writing state human development reports. He led the team that pioneered the world's first subnational HDR of Madhya Pradesh in 1995. He has since then written over 8 human development reports, 5 for Madhya Pradesh and for Punjab, Chhattisgarh, and Bundelkhand. His work in public policy has also involved planning and research work on income and employment, social sectors, poverty reduction, and urban governance. Further, he has also been running the Budget and Governance Center for Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh for over 10 years, working on budgets with governments, including continuous tracking of key sectors and key projects in agriculture, rural livelihoods, education, health, and forest. Professor Dikshit has more than 10 years of experience elected for consecutive terms to the Lok Sabha 2004 and 2002 till 2014. He was the chief whip of Indian National Congress Party from 2012 to 2014. Professor Dikshit headed the research cell for the International Congress and is co-president of the party. Professor Dikshit, it's an honor, sir, to have you here. I present to you the students enrolled for BA Honors Social Science and Policy program.
Thanks, Ankurji, and welcome to all the prospective students of the BA program and my colleagues who are here. I think Manimala ji is here, Lalit ji is here, Ankur ji is here, Bilindo boss is here. So all of you welcome. I think you had a session this morning where Professor Sudarshan and others must have told you about how this new course has come about. I would like to, in short, discuss with you the kind of topic that's been given, which is practical uses of social science in the real world. I won't talk much, but I'll try and keep my what I want to say a little brief, and perhaps take the queries and questions that come in your mind and take the discussion from there. First of all, when we say, are there practical uses of social sciences in the real world? Social sciences have actually drawn themselves from a study of the real world. Of course, so have the natural sciences. Natural sciences have studied natural phenomena and drawn all their knowledge from there. And social sciences have studied the individual. They've studied societies. They've studied villages. They've studied groups. They've studied families. They've studied nations and drawn their entire knowledge from there. So social sciences, while many people sometimes, perhaps maybe in the manner in which they are taught, or perhaps the way they've been constructed till now, or perhaps the fact that most social sciences have been taught in their silos. You either learn economics, or you learn political science, or you learn history, or you learn sociology. Because of that, perhaps the interdisciplinary nature or the cross understanding nature which life is all about, and which actually social sciences capture, understand, and help you both to understand our past, our present, and maybe a bit of what may be happening in future. I think because that has got lost out, so many people raise this question as to what is really the utility of social sciences in lives, in livelihoods, and in making us productive people once we pass out of these courses. And it is here that this course breaks those barriers. As I said, social sciences actually draws from its understanding of life. It studies an individual. It studies that thing as a person by himself or herself, and as a member of the society, or of the family, or of the habitation, or of the community, or of the caste, or of whatever social grouping he or she belongs to. They study the person as member of the family, as member of a group, as a society, as a productive person, as somebody who does something to earn or to do a productive program, as somebody who understands, who has a dedication towards things other than life. It understands its its social issues, its social connectivity, its identity issues. What is it a part of? So all these things actually is what social sciences really study. And therefore, while we have divided social sciences into the various subjects that all of us are very, very familiar with, and to some extent we are trying to bring a lot of that together while maintaining the tremendous knowledge and potential of each subject by itself, because you shouldn't dilute what the richness of the subject by itself is, and bring the best of that together to broaden our understanding. I think when you bring these together, what we are trying to do, and what you'll be able to do as people who pass out of this, is that in a sense be able to utilize in your minds the thousands of years of experience in human society. Social sciences have brought together the thousands of years of experience of Indian society, of human society, and analyzed it, and done it both academically as well as practically. And these subjects bring it together, and this course brings most of that together. So many of the things, in fact, as you know, because I'll draw a little bit from my experience. I've worked in voluntary organizations. I've worked in with governments, with small organizations, as many of the professors who will be teaching you in their own ways have all done. And there I must tell you, I think you have a very fantastic faculty that you will work with. And I think you people are much luckier than perhaps what I was when I was studying. I think it's a very, very good bunch of people who understand their subjects and understand what their subjects do and teach and understand. I think when you will go through this, at the end of it, is that perhaps as students, you'll develop in yourself the ability to analyze situations, why things have come to where they are right now, what are the different trends that have led to a particular position, is this desirable, what are the elements in it that are not desirable, and how in some way or the other we go forward from here. I won't say that one will be able to predict much of what is happening, because prediction is difficult. Even a science, even a subject that often claims to predict the future, or at least the immediate future, like economics, also finds it sometimes very difficult to be able to predict the future. So I don't know whether you'll be able to do that or not, but certainly you'll be able to present to the jobs you're doing, or the agencies you're working with, or the people you're working with, a nuanced, understood understanding of what the challenges are today, what are the best ways of undertaking them, and then obviously how at least to go forward given whatever we are there in front of us. Let me take a small example from something that's very popular these days, and therefore perhaps it will build images to all the students and make you understand better. Let's take this COVID situation that's come about. Right? Why is it that while governments and governments across the world, I'm not saying some international governments, some countries have actually done rather well, but large number of countries, that includes ourselves, why is it that politically as well as in terms of the popular demands of the voters and the Indian citizens, we never took something like public health seriously, while people who had understood and worked on social sciences and then worked on public health or on policy, constantly kept telling governments that please invest in public health. And investment in public health is not just because there may be in 100 or a 200 year scenario a pandemic like COVID. I think those investments were because the past history of humankind, and when you study sociology, when you study economics and what's happened to it, when you study political science, which tells you how people look at politics and policies emerging from that. History tells you what happened in the past. But when you take some of that, it would tell people who are engaged in social sciences that investments in the public health sector go far more in developing people, strengthening them, making their lives better and happier, and therefore making societies more resilient to any kind of attack health-wise or otherwise, whether it is an attack on their economy or an attack on their social fabric or an attack on their health, and will strengthen them, and therefore society itself will get far more resilient. So investments in health perhaps would be a far more long-term investment in strengthening all of us than many other investments would be. And I think here is where perhaps most of us did, at least those people in policy, did not listen to people who brought this tremendous view that social sciences is giving to some people to understand that. Similarly, when we talk about, when we branched, in India, say in the 1990s, and many other nations world over, many people who had understood, social sciences always said that when you're talking about growth, when you're talking about increasing manufacturing, when you're talking about giving people most prosperity, there are a few things you have to keep in mind. And those few things are that please ensure that when a country grows, all its regions and all its people grow together. The overall numbers are not important. That when you build policies, please keep it in mind that almost everybody is included in the benefits of your policy. While some sectors, some people may get a different advantage, and that happens. Not everything can grow equally, not everybody can get the same salary, not everybody can progress equally. But if you keep it in mind, because they have seen in past how unequal societies can become, how unequal economies can become, how while a country may be very, very rich, people can actually become very, very poor. How countries that can expand tremendously and have tremendous growth rates may still have huge amounts of unemployment. How young, dynamic people like 3-4 of you are listening to us may themselves be extremely qualified, but the economy may not offer them jobs because economy was never directed by people sitting at policy or other levels. To understand from the past, keep those caveats in mind and develop policies that, while on one hand give you growth or give you progress or give you direction, don't ensure that that growth is for everybody. I'm just giving these 2 or 3 simple examples to show that an understanding of social science, even in today's world, gives you much more of understanding and a vision than perhaps isolated subjects on their own would be able to give you. And which is why Jindal University has thought of a course like bachelor's in social science and policy. I think the fact that we use the word social science and policy together to an extent would probably bring a picture right in front of you. So to me, the practical uses of social science are huge. I very frankly, and I'll say this with a lot of confidence, that when I was engaging with issues in government, I've also worked with private sector organizations. I've also worked with people working in very distant areas in India. We found people who had a grasp or an understanding of different social sciences to be greatly effective workers. They were very good with numbers. They were very good with spreadsheets. They were very good with PPTs. They were very good with being able to present their thoughts. They're very good with analyzing. But apart from that, they were also very good with practical on-field. They could relate with people. They could talk to groups. They could animate with people. They could transmit your message to them. They could convey what an organization wanted to do. They could understand people and their concerns and bring it back to the organization they were working with. So in many senses, they were excellent two-way, human machines because they understood social sciences more than many of the others. So for me, students who would understand social sciences, I think are, I won't say the word machines, but I think are accomplished individuals or, well-educated individuals who over time in life would become some of the most efficient instruments of doing good things by themselves and in the organizations and sectors that they work in. So I think I'd like to end here. Maybe Professor Milindo wants to add, I'd welcome him. And if any of you want to ask questions, please do that.
So thank you, Professor Dixit. I don't want to add anything right now. Rather, it will be more interesting to get to know from the students and their queries and their, I would say, quote unquote, concerns about taking a plunge in joining a program which is absolutely new in its terms and forms being offered in India. And rather, I would be very keen and I think Professor Dixit will also be very keen to hear from you about your expectations from the program and how and what do you want to achieve at the end of the day. So it's over to you, and you may take your turns and join the discussion.
Can I request the student name-wise that they can unmute and they can introduce themselves? So we can start with Ashok Tamti. Unmute and switch on your video.
Yeah.
Ashok, introduce yourself first to the faculty and the audience here.
Very good afternoon, sir. So yeah, I'm Ashok. I prefer Ashok than to Ashok Tumpati. Sir, I so
You can give a brief about what courses you have taken in your higher secondary and how you joined this course and what you look forward and what are your questions, whatever the discussion has happened.
I have studied history, economics, commerce, and accountancy in my 12th grade, and I got to know about this course through a friend who's studying in Jindal Law College, law school, and like more I would expect from this course is a more detailed discussions about the policies that were made in our country. Like for example, like recently we just had a new education policy, so just like that. My expectations for this course is like we will have a detailed discussions and classes about how analyzing the policies like that. All for now.
Okay, Ashok, may I just ask you a small question?
Yes,
What I could gather from your from the subjects that you studied in your HS plus 2 level, it was history, accountancy, and the two others.
economics and commerce.
Okay, so what are your understanding about the relationship between, say, history and commerce, or history and economics, or economics and commerce? Have you ever thought that they are, although they are taught as several different subjects, have you ever thought that there are some interlinkages across these subjects that you study?
Yes, sir, definitely. History and economics is always uh, they have been my favorite subjects all along, and history and economics are very much interconnected with each other. Like you take it like the events that have happened in past has affected many economies and like have changed many economies in the world. Like, and even in economics they teach a bit of history, like that they talk about uh, the budget. They talk about budget and how it's happened, how it happens, and everything like that. So I think history and economics are they're very much into like very interlinked subjects. Likewise, economics and commerce, so on.
Do you think there is a linkage between history and commerce?
Yeah,
Does commerce have a history?
yeah, commerce do have a history.
So the to put it in a very, I would say, very brief perspective, the purpose of this program is to find out the linkage as to how commerce as a subject or an area evolved with inputs from history, with inputs from economics, and how even the whole idea of accountancy changed with the changes in the historical way a commerce process is done. There was no double entry bookkeeping in accountancy earlier. Double entry bookkeeping does have some historical necessity to emerge. So, what Professor Sudarshan and Professor Dixit have rightly pointed out, that when we are dealing with human beings, we cannot separate out these sort of linkages. But unfortunately, over the last 50, 60 years, we have tried to separate out. And in that process, we concentrated on the trees and missed the forest. Ultimately, we have to take care of the forest. As Professor Dixit was mentioning, I don't know whether you listened to that before the discussion began, that forests are losing out. But some trees are, we are always, still today, for the last 20 years, we have been planting trees. So we have put more emphasis on the trees, and in the process sometimes we failed to take care of the forests per se. So when we are talking about BA Social Science and Policy, we are more concerned about the overall structure of the forest than looking into some particular tree. And we expect that at the end of 3 years, we will go to that situation where you are in a position to sort of appreciate the importance of the entire gamut of social science than being an economist or a political scientist or a sociologist or a historian. So that's the expectation from you. And perhaps you will also appreciate that if you become a sort of well-versed in the understanding of the interlinkages across these different disciplines, you will be better placed to solve many of the problems, because there cannot be any human problem which can be purely economic or purely political. There are linkages across that. So from that perspective also, from a perspective of being rewarded by the society, you will also stand a better chance in the future. Thank you.
Next, we can move on to Ayan. Yes, sir.
Maniji, I just wanted to add a small point. In fact, taking off from the rather brilliant way in which Professor Milindo has explained this to you, Ashok, you had a point as to, will we also discuss decisions made in our country, like you mentioned, the new education policy, right?
Yeah.
But you will have courses which will do that, which will take you through the development history of contemporary India, why decisions were taken, what are the factors that go into it. But that is not really the crux of this course. The course at the end of the second or third year, as what Professor Milindo said, is we will try and build faculties and a discipline into you, in which you will be able to make these kind of analyses in a much more, I would say, informed and a many-angled manner, and be able to come up and you don't need at the end of 3 years, I won't say at the end of 3 years really, but you will be able to become a person who over a period of time will not need people to talk to you about what changes have happened in policy. You will be able to understand many of them yourselves. You will be able to understand them from the side of politics. You will be able to understand them from the side of finance, business, and economics. You will be understand them from the sociological view, from the view of society, from the way communities look at it, from the way other things look at it. So while there will be courses that will, in many senses, tell you what really happened and why they happened, our objective is to build you into beings who will be able to do much of this over a period of time as you gain experience, read more, live and work a little more, as to becoming very, very effective instruments of this kind of analysis yourself.
Yeah, yes, sir. Like what I really wanted to ask is,
Yes,
like, I think it's not a traditional course with like other colleges where they ask you to select 3 different subjects from different courses and try to give. But like my question is, like, will the course be connected to the contemporary world.
Absolutely, it will be. It will be. Let me make it very clear, Ashok. Social sciences are connected to the contemporary world. Okay. Even a subject like history, which is something what happened 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 years back, you look from the lens of today and from your understanding of today. Okay. So even 20 years ago, what happened, you look from a lens of today and with a desire to learn from the past as to what is happening today. Okay. So it would, I think Professor Milindo actually has been really the person who's designed this course. So 3 years down the line, if anything goes wrong, you can first catch hold of his ear and then mine. He's really to me, is really the father of this course. So, if he wants to come in, maybe he'll be able to explain better than me. But according to me, I think it's a course rooted very much in the reality of today.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Ayan is next. Ayan, unmute yourself and switch on your video so that we can have a conversation with you. Introduce yourself, and if you have any question, you can make it forward.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's really a privilege to come back to this session again. So, my name is Ayan Banerjee, and I am from Allahabad. I studied in Meinberg Allen School, and my subjects were political science, economics, psychology, sociology, physical education, and English. But I'm really happy that I've been in on the field work as well. That Mr. Sandeep sir was talking about, that field experience is so important to be added in the curriculum, and I also strongly feel that, because I've learned more from the field work rather than the classroom. I am a marathon runner, and I joined the session earlier, and sir was talking about forestation and all that. So I'm very lucky that I know, actually I'm an environmentalist. So I so must be knowing Mr. Subhendu Sharma, who planted if sir knows him. I'm into plantations and running and promoting veganism and all. So sir, actually I wanted to ask a question to you, from the fieldwork experience, what I have seen, I've worked with many NGOs. So what I have seen is that once a NGO grows, publicly, a lot of publicity is done with that NGO, and it becomes strong. So what I feel is that their motive becomes very, they don't focus on what they used to do, rather they focus more on their gaining more popularity. If their basic thing was to protect the animals and animal rights, so if they're small, they'll be doing it. But once they grow, in public and become popular, they will see they will not think about, they have to think diplomatically, politically, economically, everything, socially, everything should be right. So what are your comments on that? I think popularity restricts an NGO. So what do you think on that, sir?
It depends from organization to organization. Unfortunately, the NGO sector has also got a bit of a bad name because of large number of professionalization in this field, right? I still call the respectable organizations as voluntary organizations. I find it very difficult to use the word NGO, because NGO is really a technical term. It's a non-government organization which is registered under different rules and regulations of the government. I think the kind of organizations that really do good work is what I would initially call voluntary organizations, and perhaps all of you call NGOs. But there are 3 or 4 trajectories that a lot of organizations take. Okay, and I don't mind if I take a couple of minutes on that. One is that there are some very, very dedicated field-based NGOs, effective and working only on the sectors or on the overall goals that they work on, and they continue to do that. You will not find them outlined in magazines or talked about in television serials. They don't really depend too much on the government. Also, they do their own fundraising. They have a professional as well as a non-professional group, but a group of highly dedicated leadership. And the leadership is dedicated to the cause for which they have come into this sector rather than anything else. whenever we meet on campus, and if your class is interested, I can make you talk about many of these voluntary organizations, and maybe Professor Milindo and we can get together and do an exposure of some of these organizations with you. Then there's another type, which sometimes becomes a victim of its growth. See, when you are growing and expanding, you see right now, say for example, let me say I'm working with leather workers and flayers. Flayers are people who take dead animals, flay its skin, and then give it to tanners, and then tanners give it to various people for using of the leather. Now I'm working in a cluster of tanners, say in 30-40 villages, about say 30, 40, 50 tanners will be there in about 30, 40, 100 villages. I want to expand my reach. Okay, I have certain skills. I know how to make it better, maybe put them into a cooperative or a producer's organization. Now their economy of scale comes in. So I go from 50, 60, 200, 200, 300, 400 tanners. Then I bring in, cobblers. I bring in people who make shoes. I bring in people who do vegetable tanning. And a large group comes in. Moment it becomes 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people I'm working with, spread say over an region of 4-5 districts. I start meeting funds. I need 2 jeeps. I need a secretarial. I need somebody to do accounts. I need new people coming in. Not everybody is available for whom it's just the love of what they want to do, a dedication towards people, or a commitment to the cause who we are getting it. I need to expand beyond the group of people for whom it's pure commitment. So professionals come in, their salaries need to come in. And moment an organization grows, it starts getting compromised. You will have to look at accounts. You will have to be okay with government. Suppose you get a large grant from a international organization, then FCRA comes on you. If you're looking at large money coming from government, you cannot be critical of government. So sometimes what happens is, while they are still doing good work, right, many of the other elements of these organizations seems to get toned down. Okay. So very often you will find that, therefore they look, now why is publicity necessary? See, if my budget is say 20 lakhs or 30 lakhs, perhaps, people can get together, I have 300 friends, everybody gives me 10,000 each, I get 30 lakhs. But if I need 30 crores, I need the government, I need publicity, so I need a large TV person to do an interview for me. You understand how people can get very excited, if you present points of view that are not popular. So organizations become careful. Then there is the third group. And again, I'm only talking of good voluntary organizations. I'm not talking of people who go into anything as a business and want to earn money. So I'm not talking about that. Sometimes what happens is over time, leadership changes, new people come in. Some people may be inspired by money. Some people may not be as honest or as good as others. Say, for example, I run an organization and tomorrow I die and somebody else comes across. He may not be as dedicated as me or as honest. And therefore, corruption and other forms do come into any organization, as it happens in a lot of sectors. So that's why I'm saying various voluntary organizations go through different trajectories. And I'm taking 3 very simple trajectories for you. Okay. In fact, some of your courses, which will look at institutions, which will look at growth of people's organizations, which will look at the relationship between people, their organization, and the Indian state, both at the national and the state level. I think some of this exposure, hopefully, some of our professors will also give you. But I'm glad you asked this question.
Thank you, Ayan. Gora Sharma, kindly switch on your videos and unmute yourself.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes,
you can see you
much.
also.
Good afternoon, sir. First of all, thank you for this opportunity again. And I'll introduce myself first. My name is Gora, and I come from Delhi. I studied in Alcon International School, and my subjects were English, physical education, economics, sociology, and psychology. The question I have regarding this session is, the session is for the practical use of social science. And so I was reading about the course BA Honors Social Science and Policy on the university website, and it was mentioned that in the 6th semester, we have to complete 85 credits, write 1 term paper, and 2 internships. So I would like to know more about what kind of internship and what kind of research or field work will be provided by the university. As mentioned in the earlier open house sessions also, that the policy part of this course is all about the practical uses of it. So I would like to know more about it.
Professor Milindo, would you like to take this, or should I?
You may begin, then I'll join.
Okay. Gaura, the issue is here that the way we have planned it, and since it's a new course, obviously we cannot say that everything has been planned out and which organization we will be bringing you on is really worked on. But I think the way it's being planned is that in between your semesters, and you have I think six semesters in all, right?
Yes.
Even now, your seniors who will be in the MA Public Policy, you will meet them when you come onto campus. Many of them also take up internships in various organizations. But in your case, we will be much more organized, and perhaps the university itself and the Jindal School of Governance and Policy includes all of us, will ensure that you get internship offers. And my plan, which is what I'm sharing with all of them, is that over a period of 2 to 3 years, see, you do internships in 2 or 3 different types of organizations. At least one should be an organization working in the field. It could be a voluntary organization. It could be a government project on field. It could be a social body which is working there. So there you get some kind of slightly direct experience of working on the field. There should be at least one involved in policy making, where they look at numbers, they look at trends, they look at what has happened in the past. So perhaps you'll be able to get an idea of how large institutions look at a problem or an issue and how they do its analysis. And the third is where where you'll probably be able to where I say undertake, which is purely a government organization. So maybe something where the state intervenes, its own programs, its own policies coming through. I would say 3 or 4, at least one internship somewhere with the private sector, which these 3 or 4 together will be able to give you a very broad idea of the kind of experiences you would have. But Gaura, I would like to just put in one caveat here right now. With COVID happening, we are not sure about what is it that we will do in the next 6-8 months. Hopefully, things should ease off by October, November, and hopefully things will be safe enough for all of you to travel out. If that does not happen, then maybe after your first semester, we may not be able to do something like this. I'm hoping against it, and I hope everything will get sorted out. And Professor Milindo will probably jump in here and explain also a little bit more. But my thing is that we would try and get you people involved with 3 or 4 different kinds of organizations, doing 3 or 4 different types of work in 3 or 4 different sectors. So, in case somebody gets interested in education for a while, they may take a look at an organization working with education. Somebody may be wanting to work in immunization. Maybe somebody which works in immunization. Somebody may be working with enrollment of children in schools, maybe working in that. Somebody just wants to look at an organization that works with infrastructure related with people. So I don't think we would really prescribe something with regard to what is it that you should do, but maybe be prescriptive with regard to what kind of organizations you might like to do your internship with. But as I said, it's tentative. This year, what we will do, we are not very sure, and I'll be very frank with you. Professor Milindo, would you like to add on to this?
Yeah, you have rather exhausted all that I wanted to say. I'll just try to summarize. We have 3 beliefs in our mind. Number 1, as Professor Dixit would agree completely, I hope, with me, that social science and policy cannot be taught within the 4 walls of a classroom. And it requires a considerable exposure to what's happening outside the classroom and linking it to what's being discussed inside the classroom. You are talking about internship between 2 semesters. That's very important. I am coming to that. But my personal feeling is, and my personal experience is, that you will be an intern in social science and policy making for all the hours in the day, excluding the number of hours you are inside a classroom. So your internships starts from the very day you join the program, and you are rather conscious to keep your eyes and ears open to sort of incisively look at as to what's happening to the society around you. And that's very, very important. If you think that, well, for 4 months you only listen to what's being discussed in the class, and then you will go in the 5th month to a field setting and will try to apply them, perhaps you are mistaken. Your internship, rather, perhaps I would say, has already started even before you have started your coursework. So keep your eyes and ears open. Even I would say you have to keep your nose open as well, because you have to smell something. And unless you smell what's happening around you and link it up to what you are studying, you won't be able to become a good social scientist or a good policy maker. And that is the fundamental problem. We have, unfortunately, uh, created a compartment between studying and interning. Interning and studying are no two different processes. You are an intern to the society even today, and you have to keep that in mind, and you have to continuously learn. What is internship? Internship is to learn something outside the classroom. And you have the entire society open to you for interning and learning. So my feeling is, and my humble request to all of you is, that don't consider that these two processes are separate. They go on simultaneously. You learn from what's happening within your family. You learn from what is happening in your community. You learn something from what is happening in your country. So they are to be always linked up to what's being discussed in your classroom, inside your classroom. And if you keep your eyes and ears open, you also become capable of asking questions inside the classroom when you find that something being discussed in the classroom is not tallying with your experiences outside the classroom. Or you may substantiate something being discussed in the classroom with what you have seen outside the classroom. So the point that I am trying to make, number one, is that these two are not separate, they are interlinked together. Number two, as Professor Dixit rightly mentioned, we have interactions and networks with some organizations across different types of organizations, be it government, be it private sector, be it international organizations, be it, say, the NGOs, and we will be able to put you in touch with the type of organizations that you think are necessary. And also, I am putting a caveat here, also what we think would be effective and necessary for you, given your capabilities and the way you have developed during the course of this program. So it will be not just an absolute autonomous choice of yours. There will be some amount of choice decided by the faculty as well, and they would help you in locating the right kind of exposure that you require during the period of internship. And in the context of the present day COVID process, it will be a problem, but given the technological development, it is also possible to have some online internship or something like that. As right now, 15 of our MAPP students are doing their internship with an organization located in Paris. And they are working on issues, public policy issues related to countries in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and other cross-cutting issues as well. So this is an organization called OECD Development Center, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the organization of the so-called donor countries, developed countries in the world. So these sort of opportunities are there, but The point is, it may not be so that the faculty feel that you should intern with OECD right now. The faculty may think that, well, it would be better for you, given your capabilities and interest, it may be better for you to intern with some other organization. So I hope I could make the points, your queries clear. Or
Yes,
you
sir.
have some more questions?
No, sir. Thank you so much for explaining to me the internship part of the course, and I really appreciate this session and what this session is trying to session is trying to inform the students regarding this course. And thank you, sir.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Gora. Next is Tejveer. Tejveer, switch on your video. Yeah, hi Tejveer. So you can introduce yourself and you can raise your question.
I'm Tej. I'm from Delhi. I've done 2 years in OPJMSSR and 8 years I've been in boarding in Bishop Cotton School, Shimla. I've done 4 years in non-medical, that's physics, chemistry, maths, English, and physical education. And I wanted to know in brief if you could guide me in what should I do, because I'm obviously miles behind all of these people. I haven't been on touch with much of the economic part or say policy making.
Okay, Sandeep.
Sir, unmute yourself. You're on mute.
Sorry, sorry. Tejveer, let me say, let me start. I did science in school, okay? I did physics, chemistry, mathematics, and biology. I wanted to become an orthopedic. And as I did my class 11th, I found, that I didn't have the capacity to study as hard as it would to get a medical degree. Then, I somehow got slightly decent marks in my 12th and I didn't know what to do, but I took history. And after doing 5 years of history, I worked with some voluntary organizations, and I found I of course also studied at the Institute of Rural Management, where all the subjects of statistics, maths, accounts, economics were thrust upon me. Not having touched numbers for 5 years, I was engaging with numbers for a long period of time. And then, of course, in a lot of other analyses and some of the research work that I did later on, I engaged with the field of statistics and mathematics and economics a lot. So it's not difficult. The reason I'm giving you my example is that I'm not a person who's very happy with numbers. There was a time when I would get smoke out of my ears every time there used to be a mathematics examination. I mean, let me be very frank with you. In my class 11th, I almost jumped and didn't give my class 12th exam, my class 11th maths exam. Thoda badmash hote the. Anyway, that apart. I'm saying this because it's not really that. I think you have a science background. I think if you have an affection and if you take to subjects which are going to be taught in BA Social Science, it's not difficult. I think you will be able to take them easily. Perhaps your background in science may be able to, in fact, help you a lot more. You will bring a variety to class. You will be able to bring some of the analytical tools that at least subjects like physics and chemistry and mathematics bring to you. There will be use of mathematics in some of the courses and economics and others that you'll be taught. I think it'll be great. As I said, I think I did eminently okay with a totally science background into arts and back. And I think Professor Milindo, forgive me if you often find my maths and economics to be a little warped, but that's because of my completely non-economic background otherwise. But I think it'll be good. So we take this to be, I think an exciting challenge. And I think you will bring a lot of new elements and a very interesting mix with the kind of, course backgrounds your other colleagues will bring to your class.
So let me just add one point, and maybe you will then feel energized and excited about it.
Yes,
for last 10 years, there has been emerging a new way of looking at social science, and the discipline has been named as quantum social science. And it is a methodological fusion between the understanding of quantum physics and social science per se. the main fundamental idea is that every individual behaves like a quantum. And the behavior of individuals are to be understood from the perspective of how a quantum behaves in terms of the quantum theory propounded by Max Planck and his followers. You might have some idea about that as to how it is different from the Newtonian physics that is generally taught at the classroom level. Another area which has now tried to link up biological sciences and social sciences has borrowed immensely from an area of physics called thermodynamics. And now one area that has developed is called the social science of entropy. Perhaps you have heard the term, the second law of thermodynamics and third law of thermodynamics.
Yes.
So the point is, while we are here talking about the interlinkage across the different branches of social science, people have started talking in terms of the interactions between social science and natural science and physical science. So this will be a first step towards this unification of all sciences, that we are in a methodological format, that the world is moving forward. Say, take the case of climate change. Climate change cannot be understood by a social scientist without inputs from the physical scientists and those who are specializing in animal kingdom and the other life sciences. So now, again, as I was discussing with Gaurav, that just as you cannot distinguish between internship and studies, time has now come where those lines of demarcation between social science, physical science, and life sciences those lines are also getting blurred. And in that sense, your background in physical science will be, I think, a positive component in your understanding of the social science. And I must also say that I studied science up to class 12, was forced by my parents to join IIT, and I left in disgust. I didn't like it. So the point is, it's not that there is no linkage. And I could realize that the linkage is there, and there should be some people who can identify that linkage. And that will be much more challenging. If your life is not challenging, then what's the life? Right? So accept challenge and pursue it. And already Manimala is giving me a signal that perhaps the time is up. I have overshot the time by 1 minute. But the fundamental point is, as I was studying in my school, the logo of what we were told by the school, that you should believe in a statement, find a way or make it. You have to find a way, and if you cannot find it, you have to make it. And when you have joined BA Social Science Policy Program, you are in that position. You may not find a way, and then your job is to make it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I hope I answered your questions.
Yes, sir.
Not convincingly, right?
No,
because if I could answer it convincingly, then I would have thought that I have been a failure. My job is to create confusions in your mind, and then only I am a successful professor. If I answer all your questions without any doubt, then my role as a professor is zero. Okay. I hope I could create some confusions in you. Have I?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dikshit. Thank you, Professor Milindo. Thank you, students, for joining us with this session. Thank you.
Thank you.